Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikkas silmät niin mustat kuin yö.
Hello. Welcome to the first edition of Gloucester Bookies for the new year.
Yes.
So happy New Year to all of you. I'm Ray Hildenen, and today I'm joined by our wonderful Sharon Cook, who's going to be...
Sharon Love Cook.
Sharon Love Cook,
Yes.
exactly.
That was my Gloucester name.
And then, and I wanted to start by letting people know Wayne will not be joining us today due to some COVID restrictions, but he's doing fine. So and since his last visit on the Bookies, he's been very busy promoting two of his books, Ed and Joe. He spoke twice, to my knowledge, once at the bookstore in Gloucester, and then also just before Christmas at a wonderful gathering near Biskin Neck in Rockport. And he sold a great many copies of Ed and Joe, and for which the 400th anniversary, Gloucester's 400th anniversary will benefit. And he also introduced another novel that he has written.
How does he do it?
I have no idea,
my God.
but The Great Gatsby and the Zombies by our inestimable Wayne Soini. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start on my first book, which is The Sleeve Should Be Illegal. And then when I'm done with this, I'm going to turn it over to Sharon Love Cook, and then she's going to turn it back to me when I'm going to wrap up my talk on the Johnstown flood. And at that time, I'm going to let you know, all our audience, as well as those here in the studio, that how these two are connected. So I'm going to start by talking about the Henry Clay Frick collection on Fifth Avenue in New York City. It's one of the great Beaux-Arts museums and mansions of its time, and Henry Clay Frick was one of the great industrialists of the late 19th century, sorry. And so
Excuse me,
yes.
Ray, can I say something?
Yes.
I live in Beverly Farms, and
yes,
right in next door in Price
I know what you're going to
Crossing,
say.
the Frick Estate.
Yes.
I mean, what a fence, a wall, this great wall around it. I mean, it just goes on for miles. Is it still?
No, it has been raised now, but
Yeah,
but the actual estate is still there.
It's still
And
wow.
so he has this outstanding art collection, which he passed down to his daughter, and then when she passed away, it became open to the public. It is one of the most distinguished art collections in North America, and it also, for its type, it's small, although it's housed in a large museum,
Now,
which
where
was
is it
his
located?
mansion.
Is it in
On
New
Fifth
York?
Avenue in New
yeah,
York.
New York. Okay, I didn't.
And he was a really magnificent art collector, and so for the number of paintings and other pieces of objets d'art that he has, it's one of the most distinguished collections. So I thought about this because I have been thinking before COVID that I would travel down to New York City and visit some of the museums, which I used to do quite a bit when I lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, because we had buses and trains every single day that would go.
That was easy.
And it's not so easy now, and with COVID present, also it's not so easy to do. But I'm just going to briefly talk about this wonderful, wonderful art collection. and then tie it into the Great Johnstown Flood of 1889, the worst, at that time, the worst public disaster in North America. And natural disaster is what it was called, but I'm going to introduce some facts that may indicate it was not so natural, that there were other causes.
I was going to say that certainly is ties in with the flooding that's going on in California
Yes,
now, and that
I
will
thought about
continue
that.
in the next 5 days. Maybe it might equal that.
So why I chose this book on the Frick collection in New York City is that it is well known amongst scholars and artists and literary figures who go there for inspiration. They love the building and they love the artwork. And this book is a modern example of the term ekphrasis, which means simply like a literary description of a piece of work, artwork. A very common example of that is Ode to a Grecian Urn by Keats. And there are 50 famous contemporary artists, actors, sculptors, each of whom has a chapter in this book describing one of their favorite pieces of work in the museum. And one of the phrases that stands out to me from this book is how many people say walking into the Frick Museum, the Frick collection, is like walking on air. Other people say when they leave the museum, it's like, and walk across to Central Park, let's say, they say it's like walking on air.
Wow.
So, other examples, famous examples, I mentioned Ode on a Grecian Urn. There are a couple other really famous ones that many people will know about. One of the first examples of ekphrasis was the Shield of Achilles, which is the subject of two poetic descriptions in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, and also in Virgil's Aeneid. And both of them dealing with the Shield of Achilles. And then most recently, the poet W.H. Auden wrote a famous poem called The Shield of Achilles. In addition to that, there is, in this book, Andre Ackerman, who wrote Call Me By Your Name and also wrote the screenplay for that book, became a famous, evocative romantic story. And he claims that he was inspired for some of the scenes by this famous painting by Corot at the Frick Museum called The Ville d'Avray. And I'll just show you that, in fact, there are scenes in that film in which the two protagonists, the two lovers, if you will, are boating. And so you can see the connection. I'll mention one other famous painting, which is
That is famous.
Hans Holbein the Younger, his famous picture of Thomas Cromwell. And what's really interesting is that Hilary Mantel, the British author, wrote 3 books about Thomas Cromwell, and she claims she drew inspiration from this painting. And she won 2 Booker Prizes for volumes 1 and 2 of her 3-volume series. Wow. That is very rare that a second volume of the same artwork, of the same literary work, should be honored. And I'm just going to point...
She must be the expert on the
topic. Yes. And 3 people, there were 50 people who were interviewed for this book. 3 of them chose that painting. Yeah. So why my fascination with the Frick Museum and the Johnstown flood? Well, as it turns out, Henry Clay Frick was in fact one of the founders of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. And the dam that they built to create this magnificent lake way up on the top of the Alleghenies was so that they could flee there from the hot, smelly summers of Pittsburgh. Some of the people who joined him there were Andrew Carnegie and Andrew Mellon and many, many, many other millionaires of Pittsburgh.
What was the area called, Ray, where this area they settled?
This was the South Fork Club, and they created a lake called Lake Conemaugh.
Oh, okay. Oh,
and
sure.
the Lake Conemaugh is also, there's a river which flows from it, and it derives from one of the native Indian words for otter, because the otters would frolic in the creeks in this area. Oh. So I'm going to let everyone wait and see, okay, what is this connection between the Frick Museum and the Johnstown flood?
Yeah.
And turn it over to Sharon at this time.
Now, people are going to expect me to tell them what the connection is.
No, I'm going to do that when you're done.
I don't know what the connection is. I have to wait for Ray. And you are
going to
I'll have
give
to
us
wait
some
for
tips.
Ray to let us know. So that way they'll have to stay tuned, because you're going to finally spill the beans later. Well, I won't take up much time. I just wanted to, our producer, Wayne Soiney, said, why don't you bring in one of your Frugal Finn tips? I am the Frugal Finn. It's sort of based on my mother. My mother was the original Frugal Finn. I wrote about her, and I'm very pleased to say my story about her. My mother, the Frugal Finn, is selected as one of the Gloucester 400 for their celebration. Well, this year, their celebration in 23. So, and my mother's picture's there on the site. I said she would be so pleased.
Wonderful.
If she were alive. But here is one of my, the last time I brought in coat hangers, I brought in all kinds of stuff, but I thought I'd bring in something that I could easily fit into my car. Okay, now, I'm sure many of you throw away your empty toilet paper rolls. Now here we're listening to Ray's fine talk about the Frick Museum, and I'm talking about toilet paper rolls. Somehow that's a little digression, but you know, it's practical. This is practical, and we have to live in practical times now, you know, what with inflation and all. So most people throw them away. Well, I'm here to tell you that you can, I'm sure you have plenty of extension cords at home. People are always, if your house is like mine, you open a drawer and it's just filled with extension cords, and I want to throw them away. I mean, I've had them for years. I don't even know what they go to anymore, but I'm so afraid I know what'll happen. I'll throw one away and I'll have a use.
Then you'll need it.
Is that, I'll have a use for that specific one. And that is really frustrating. So take an empty toilet paper roll and just wind your extension cords and shove them in there and then put them away. It keeps your drawer from being all tangled. And also, I am told, and I'll have to try this, you can put socks in there. You know, I have a drawer just filled with socks and unmentionables. And this is so great because it's dark in my room and I can never see, and I never pull out a pair of socks that are matched. I probably don't have them on now. But you can put also gloves. Just roll up your gloves and put them in there. So there you go. That is a very practical tip, and you don't have to go out and buy anything. I'm assuming everyone has toilet paper at home. Now, I would like to, on my book, my mysteries, the Granite Cove Mysteries, I would intersperse each book with Auntie Pearl's helpful housekeeping hints. Now here's a logo that I drew for Auntie Pearl, and you can get a close-up. I'm going to scan this. That's a logo. She was a lot thinner initially. In the first book, she was quite skinny, and someone said, no, you know, if she's doing all that cooking in the kitchen, chefs you know.
And so, who is she actually? Is she a character in some of your novels, or is she actually?
No, she's not. It's just that originally, my protagonist, Rose McNichols, is she's a journalist. Well, she calls herself a reporter. She said she's no journalist. Yeah. She's a reporter for the Granite Cove Gazette. And sort of to spice up her columns and just to spice up the paper's a weekly, she would put in these housekeeping hints. And she would call it Auntie Pearl's Helpful Housekeeping Hints. And she did it for a few issues and then just stopped. And then all the readers wrote in and they all said, what happened to Auntie Pearl? So that actually happened to me too. Wasn't a great outpouring, but people did say to me, what happened to Auntie Pearl's housekeeping hints? I said, I follow those. So I had them, every other chapter, I'd put a housekeeping hint in my Granite Cove Mysteries. I am now working on Granite Cove Mystery number 4.
Oh, wow.
It's a, isn't it terrible? My mind has gone blank. Well, it's murder. Oh, I got it. Murder of a not so innocent intern. The Granite Cove Gazette gets an intern, and they get more than they bargained for. Her name is Gina Balzo, and she's quite a character. So that's what it's about. Gee, I just went blank there. I think it's the pressure of being on air and being watched by millions of people.
Millions. Don't worry, because while you were doing that, there's a book that I want to talk about, and yes. I can't remember, and I didn't write it down, so I hope it comes to me.
It will come to you, and I hope it's not as you're getting your coat on, because that's what usually happens. You walk out the door and it's right there. Well, I couldn't believe I've been working on this book, but during COVID I put it away. I don't know why. I wasn't sick. I just put it away.
I had a question I've been meaning to ask you for a while. Do any of your readers ask you, where is Granite Cove, or which of the many coves and so forth on Cape Ann?
Well, they know it's Cape Ann because people say to me, you were writing about my beach, or you were writing about this.
Yes.
Because they know it is. It's Gloucester, it's Rockport, and it's also, I live in Beverly, so
yes.
I have Beverly in there, of course, Boston. So I called it Granite Cove. Initially, I called it Herring Cove, and then I discovered that there's
one in
Provincetown.
Provincetown.
I know there's it really is hard to find something that hasn't been done before.
There's also one in Maine, I think, a very small one.
I'm sure there's probably a Granite Cove too. It's really hard to come up with something new that sounds plausible. But I like Granite Cove because, my God, this is Granite
Exactly.
City.
And it gives people the opportunity, by not naming a very specific place, it gives people the opportunity to choose their own location. I've been there. I know this place.
Yes,
that's yes. Right. I sat right on that very spot where that person was.
That's right. And if I was specific in labeling it, then people would say, oh, I've never heard of that. I don't know what are you talking about? What is that place? So if I make it, if I give it a name that they haven't heard of that isn't around here, I can't be held accountable, because I can create other stuff too.
That's right.
I can create other locations, and I can create other people. I can create a whole new police force and all that, which I did.
The willing suspension of disbelief, as was.
That's right. They must suspend. Well, I think we all do that just to read fiction anyway. You have to suspend your judgment, and
accept and allow yourself to accept what the author is telling you, because if you don't, you're not going to get anything out of it.
I know, to get into the story. Not funny. So without further ado, I will just get. Should I read? I have a couple I have 2 Auntie Pearl letters that appeared in the book. All right,
absolutely.
They're short ones. Okay. Dear Auntie Pearl, I sometimes stay overnight with my elderly mother who lives in a retirement community. One night I got up to use the bathroom and heard noises coming from her room. I spotted her 14-year-old cat drinking from the glass that holds mother's dentures. The next morning I told her what I'd seen. Amazingly, she wasn't in the least concerned about the health hazards. I'm afraid my mother is getting dementia. When I threatened to call her doctor, she said I'm a fuss budget. In any event, the situation is unsanitary and may be dangerous. Because Mother reads your column, I decided to let you talk some sense into her. Signed, Worried in Woburn. Dear Worried, I consulted Dr. Emil Fetlock.
I love that name.
Can I say something? A lot of people don't realize. Do you know what a fetlock is?
No, but it is a actual term.
Yeah,
for
well, on a horse, like a Clydesdale, it's that,
that sort of bottom part of the
Yes, the fringe that hangs over the hoof. Well, thank you for realizing. No one else has picked up on that except you, Ray. I consulted Dr. Emil Fetlock, a well-respected veterinarian, who says your mother's cat is in no danger from drinking this solution. According to Dr. Fetlock, denture cleanser is mild and well diluted. Nonetheless, you might try convincing your mother to leave a bowl of fresh water by her bed, allowing the cat access throughout the night. Pleasant dreams. Okay, number 2 letter. Dear Auntie Pearl, my boyfriend Roland is masculine in every way. He's a rugby player and outdoorsman. Lately, we've been discussing marriage. Although I'm terribly fond of Roland, there's a small problem that troubles me. When he comes to visit, I've discovered my pantyhose missing from the laundry hamper. It is not my imagination. This has happened on several occasions. Outside of this tiny flaw, Roland is perfect. However, I can't help wondering what he wants with my pantyhose. Don't suggest confronting him. I'd be too embarrassed. Signed, Baffled in Burlington. Dear Baffled, it's no mystery to me what Roland is doing with your pantyhose. I'm willing to wager he's discovered they make excellent ties for tomato plants. Yes. Simply cut them off below the crotch. I can say that word here, can I?
Sure, certainly.
Make further cuts so that you end up with 6-inch strips. Now you have a dozen ties that hold firmly, yet have a flexibility that yields to growth. These nylon ties can be used year after year. Instead of being suspicious, you should be thankful for such an industrious boyfriend. When August arrives, I hope Roland is willing to share his crop. Bon appetit!
Oh no! I have to admit that was a much more innocent and practical answer than I thought might be the case.
Oh, I know. Well, I can't imagine people thinking anything otherwise. I just wanted to add, I meant to mention this, but this kind of fits in. Here's a frugal fin tip for the gardener. Now this is coming up. Spring is coming. Spring is on the way. Cut up chunks of strong-smelling soap, sort of like Irish Spring, and scatter in the garden. Scatter it throughout the garden. Most wildlife, including rabbits and deer, hate the smell of strong soap. So that's better than putting out pesticide or, something like that. Just cut up chunks of soap, leave it in the garden. I don't know what you do when it rains, I was thinking, but it's, it's safe.
Well, maybe
it's not poisonous.
Well, the soap runoff maybe will cleanse the garden of any impurities.
That's right. Good idea. And I think it does keep out slugs,
yes.
things that eat, things that will eat the leaves and whatnot. So that's what I have, Ray.
Well, I have another question for you, if you don't mind.
Yes.
And that is, tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, if we're not jumping the gun, what your latest book is or your next one on the Granite Cove Mysteries.
Okay, the Granite Cove Mysteries. Now I really have to get to it, now that I've committed it,
No, or simply, do you have one that you just finished or one that you're beginning?
Well, I do have one called Phantom Baby, and that came out, it was over 5 years ago,
Okay.
Phantom Baby, and again, it was the town of Harborvale, which is, Cape Ann and the environs. And it was printed by Martin Brown. They're in Indiana. They're sort of a mid-sized publishing company. And the contract expired. After 5 years, the contract expired, and the rights reverted to me.
Oh,
so I
good.
thought I would make some changes to this. I added a little more material. I called it, got a new title. I also re-edited it myself. I put some new material in, and I called it, and I wish I'd brought a copy with me. I didn't know you were going to ask, but I called it, the new title is Talking to the Moon.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, thank you. Well, there are couple of other books I should have checked on Amazon. A couple of other books
To see if
Talking to the Moon. Yeah,
Okay.
But because the other title, Phantom Baby, some people thought it was science fiction, and just something about the title. They didn't quite know. They thought it was science fiction. So that's why this new title. And also, there's a passage in there that I put in there. She's at Long Beach and Rockport, which I know very well. They rented a cottage every year. Her family did, and her cousin Zara, who's she's trouble, is staying with them for a whole month. And Rose is she just can't. Well, not Rose. Her name is Iris. I'm sorry, Rose. Iris can't stand it. Can't stand this girl. This girl is a weasel. So what she does is she grew up Catholic and got away from the church, but she has always talked to the moon. She said maybe a form of prayer. So she sits outside on the steps of her cottage, and the moon is right there shining on the water. When no one's around, this is when everyone's in bed, and she'll sit there and talk to the moon and say what is troubling her, and she always feels better afterwards. She said, because the moon is, implacable. The moon just is accepting and just doesn't respond, but she feels as if she's being heard. And so it's talking, and during times of trouble, she will do this. So I called it Talking to the Moon, and I got a new cover. The cover is great. I had to do all this myself because I'm putting it on Amazon.
Oh.
You can't find another publisher. It's already been published. So I published it myself on Amazon. I found the greatest cover. I looked for days and days. You should have seen what I came up with. I did a search, like Getty Images and all the those standard image online, and I would say woman, night. I wanted a woman walking on the beach at night. Woman, night, beach.
Okay.
Well, you should have seen something.
What would
nude.
come up?
I didn't want nude, but I saw the nude pictures would come up. So finally, it's a British site. It's very small. It's called Color Block, COLOURBLOX.
Oh.
It's terrific, and I found just the cover I wanted. I love it. So the cover is just great. It really sums up everything that I wanted to do with the book and what the book is all about. And next time we're on, I'll bring it with me so I can show the new cover. So that is on Amazon, and it's online, and it's Talking to the Moon. And if you type in my name, Sharon Love Cook,
Talking to the Moon,
you will find it. And I've gotten a lot of nice reviews.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So leave a review if you do read it.
When you first mentioned the title to me, I thought for a minute I had heard of it, and then I thought, but in my mind I was thinking of a book published in the late 60s, Tell Me You Love Me, Junie Moon, which was turned into a movie with
Liza Minnelli.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And remember the police came because this is a long time ago.
Yes.
They were filming at the old cemetery there in Manchester. They were filming, and they had to close it down because they didn't get permission. And they were filming. It caused a big brouhaha, with the cops got involved, and well, that was good publicity for the movie.
Yeah.
I remember that. But Talking to the Moon. Well, my rising planet. I had my zodiac sign my astrology chart done, and they said Neptune rising is my ruling planet. So I like the moon, and I'm a Piscean, so I'm very moon oriented.
Wow. So, do you have any plans to start another?
Well, I
any
want to
inspirations?
finish. I'm halfway through. What was that title again? Oh my Lord, I can't think of it.
But
it's
not
murder.
Well, listen. Let me.
Intern.
Sorry.
A not so innocent intern.
There you
go.
But
Murder
the reason
of
I
a
asked
not
you
so
that,
innocent intern. Yeah, I know it. Oh, I must write it down.
And
You're
I
throwing
didn't
me
know.
These fastballs,
I'm
Ray.
sorry. I won't do any more excepting
No.
ask
Go
if
ahead.
that is.
Keeps me on my
is it going to
toes.
be one of the?
I'm a senior, you know, Ray.
Well, I am too. As I
It
cough.
takes a little while for those gears to
and it will
spin.
be one of the Cove murder.
Oh,
mysteries,
yes.
Then.
Yeah. I have a wonderful logo, too. I found a wonderful logo for Granite Cove logo. Yes. And it's funny, the woman who does my covers, she's awfully good. She's in California. She's done other covers for me. She's a professional, book cover artist, book cover designer, I should say. Did the covers, and, they have to do the back cover and the spine and all that. It's very technical. And I sent her, I sent her a check. I was going to send her a check, and her address was Granite Bay, California.
Oh,
I thought that was kind of ironic.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to. I dedicated the book to Laura Ventimiglia, Gloucester's Laura Ventimiglia. The one she's with
and
Gloucester 400.
Yes, I was just going to say there was an article in the paper recently, just the other day.
Oh, wonderful! I'll have to read that. I dedicated it to her because I was really slagging. Left to my own devices, I'll get very distracted, and I'll find something else to do rather than.
Was she in your class?
No, she.
Okay.
Well, she came. She was on one of these shows, one of our shows, talking about her book. She wrote a wonderful book about her Italian heritage and her family, and she researched everything and came and talked to us. So. We were communicating, and I told her about this book that I wanted to convert. I was going to convert it to put it out myself, and how I've sort of been doing everything but. And she was great. Well, she was a teacher, a dean actually, at the college at North Shore Community College. She was a dean of students, and so she knows how to get students motivated. So she really got me. She got me to finish. I mean, just encouraged me, and so I finished it. And so I thought, well, I'm going to dedicate this to her because she did more.
Well, that was very kind of
just
you.
Her. Well, she was so good. I mean, she just, without making me feel like a slug. Do you know what I mean? Like a slug.
I don't think so.
No. She just made me feel like you can do it, and I should do it, and I did it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks to Laura Ventimiglia.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your entertaining portion of today's program.
Thank you, Ray.
I hope I didn't ask too many questions, but
no.
So now maybe some people are wondering, okay, Ray, what is this connection between the Frick Museum and the Johnstown floods?
Can you hold up the cover of the Johnstown floods?
I will later, because it actually isn't that. It won't show up that great. I don't think. But I thought it was fascinating because, as Sharon already mentioned, floods and rainstorms have been very much in the news, and so. The book in particular that I'm going to talk about, actually there's two, David McCullough's. I won't hold them up because they're not
the famous historian.
Yes, this was his first book.
Oh, wow.
And it was, I believe, published first in 1966. This is the 1986 edition. I will hold it up, but it probably isn't going to show too much. and
You
I'll
can
leave it
they'll
focused.
scan it, they'll show it.
And but I had always thought of the Johnstown floods. I remember as a youngster in the old Lane School in Lanesville, on the weekly readers that used to come to us, I remember hearing about the Johnstown floods and how devastating they were.
Well, can you just say what state is this?
In Pennsylvania,
In
and the
Pennsylvania,
Alleghenies.
Okay. Oh, okay, yes.
And they, it was the most, at the time, it was the worst, and I'm going to use quote, natural disaster in American history, and subsequently, I believe, still only surpassed by the Galveston hurricane, and I believe 1900. So, what's really interesting to me was that I had really always thought of it as a natural disaster. That after days and days and days of torrential rain, suddenly the South Fork Dam burst, and 20 million gallons of water descended the mountainsides and tumbling down, and made it, I believe, I know, all the way to Johnstown, the largest community in that section of the Alleghenies. And Johnstown was a town that had been established it had a large industrial segment to its population because they dealt with steel, iron, and coke. And one of the fascinating things is that New York and Pennsylvania were actually in competition in a race to sort of see which state could reach Lake Erie in terms with a viable means of transportation, so that the goods from the Ohio River and Ohio Country could make it to New York and or Philadelphia, and the goods and merchandise of New York and Philadelphia could make it out beyond the Ohio. So New York won, Erie Canal was first, and to make a long story short, it turns out that one of the canals was going to be built, was actually bought by a group of very rich Pittsburgh financiers, bankers, industrialists, such as Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Carnegie, and also Andrew Mellon. And so they used a dam that had already been built for this sequence of canals. And they used this dam to fill a lake, which they called Lake Conemaugh. And it was a huge lake, simply so that these rich industrialists could have a lake at the top of the Alleghenies to sail their beautiful sailboats, scudding along the lake. And the poor people down below the mountain could look up and sometimes see these boats. And they had never imagined that there would be boats up on this lake. Mm-hmm. Well, in 1889, there had been 3 floods at least in this area. The Alleghenies are part of the country known as there's a continental divide in the Rocky Mountains, but there also is in the Alleghenies, in the Appalachians, that there is a section of, when it rains, some of that water goes down to the Atlantic Ocean, some goes into towards the Ohio and the Mississippi, hence into the Gulf of Mexico. And so this area has always been prone to floods. And the Great Flood of 1889 is now thought, and both David McCullough and another person, Al Roker, the weatherman, has also written a book about it called The Ruthless Tide. I just bit my tongue, sorry. Yeah. And it's really interesting because although Al Roker uses David McCullough's book, he also talks a lot about the current day events in the sense that we have either through global warming or just destruction of our natural habitat, we have made disasters like this more and more possible. And at the time, back in 1889, that was not, it wasn't thought that man created these disasters. It was thought that they were natural.
Yeah.
So for a minute, that's enough about that background, because I just want to, this book is fascinating, the David McCullough book, because it talks about the actual destruction that this flood caused, as 20 million gallons of water tore down the mountainside and hit two small villages first, and then struck the town of Johnstown and wiped out all but 3 buildings.
Well, how many people? Did they know how many
Well,
people
that's
were
a
killed?
very good question.
Yeah.
2,000, over 2,000. The official count, I believe, is either 2,207, 2,208, or 2,209.
And they had no warning?
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
There had been so many warnings before because of so many floods in this area that this dam would eventually give way. And when it finally did, people were sort of like, it's not going to happen. So also because there were no telephone lines, there were telegraph lines, but there was one right at the top of the dam. It was knocked down. All the telegram wires were broken. So there was very little.
Oh my God, no communication. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, there was, again in this book, there was a famous rumor that, similar to Paul Revere, there was a famous young Pennsylvania patriot who galloped on his horse down the mountainside, all the way down, and spread the word. The flood's coming, the dam is broke. However, the story's a bit apocryphal because no one knew his name, and there was actually no main road. There was never a road from the dam down to the city. So that was another problem that was encountered. But there were so many rumors that it's interesting that this rumor became known. And also there were predictions. Back in 1864, there was a book published in England, which actually in England predicted a flood, but it was a novel, a flood of a steel factory in England that would wipe out the city. And that book, published in 1864, in 1889 became a bestseller again because people thought that it predicted this it was so close to what happened to the flood in 1889 that.
So people were like in a valley, they were like trapped, were they
yes,
like in
absolutely.
this valley?
And
oh my God.
I asked at the beginning of the program if I could stand up and
demonstrate.
The Allegheny, I now want to go and visit this. And there's actually a museum.
Wow.
But the Allegheny
that would
valleys
really be interesting,
are they're V-shaped. And from the top to the bottom, the water just came tumbling down like a funnel, exactly.
Oh my God.
And took everything in its path. And
it's hard to believe they don't have pictures. Do they have pictures?
They do, but and I'm not going to even show them because they're really poor. I will put one up. Yeah. Maybe it can be scanned.
That's
but because this is before really, even for, I mean, there were some photographs, but not they're really not of great quality. But here's a picture of a bridge. I'll show you first. A bridge, a huge stone bridge, a railroad bridge.
Oh, yes.
That was one of the only surviving edifices. And then down below, the only buildings left afterwards.
They were up higher.
They were up higher, exactly.
Oh, wow.
Because in addition to being in a, I'm going to show,
valley.
And I'll see if they can scan this for our audience afterwards.
They will, yeah.
And so
show up close.
It's really interesting that in addition to being a funnel, at the base of this supposed funnel in Johnstown, there were two other streams that came together. So when this flood came, it actually met these two other, the Stony Creek and the Little Conemaugh River. When it met them, it actually backed up so that you had people literally cascading down in their homes, in their barns, in their carriages, on horseback, tumbling down the river. Then when it reached this juncture, it went back up for 2 miles.
Oh my God!
And so some observers
Think of
actually,
the force. Think
yes,
of the force of that.
some people actually, as observers,
Yeah.
frightened observers, saw the same people coming down on their mattresses, on their
beds,
yes, and then the same people going upstream because of the force.
I wonder if they were able to get off at that point.
A lot of
Probably
people,
not.
well,
Yeah,
a lot of
maybe.
people did, and there were a lot of saviors, which the story, incredible stories of heroism that are told in this book.
That always happens, doesn't
And
it?
also, what was perhaps different from our time, particularly in the first 24 hours, no looting, no mayhem, other than absolute panic, and no rapes. The women were very afraid of being,
of course,
because they were because it was an industrial town. There were over 1,000 transient workers in town that day. Plus, this happened on Memorial Day, and so it's sometimes called the Memorial Day flood.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And so, why was I fascinated by this? Well, one day, the very next day after this horrible disaster, and I've not really gone into it at all, 2,000 people killed. Two infants were born, one on a woman. She gave birth on a mattress as it flooded, as it came down on the flood. A woman gave birth to her baby.
Just imagine.
Can you imagine?
Did they survive?
Yeah, they did, but there was another woman who was pregnant, 2 or 3 who did not.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting point because in the book, it turns out that there was another child born during the flood. And it turned out he lived for 106 years. And he died in 1995.
Isn't that something?
And isn't that amazing?
Well, it's funny. Can you imagine if he told people would say, and he survived the is it Youngstown flood?
The Youngstown
flood. And it's been so long that a lot of people probably said, what's that? Like,
well, I think most people,
but
I bet most people didn't, and certainly for the first half of the 20th century.
So many years had gone
but
by.
it stayed in the news because it captured the imagination for certainly for half a century, and also because there were 2 other floods. One in 1903, another in 1936, and after that, Congress finally, and there was several engineering studies done, and they decided they had to, because of the geography of this area, there was just going to continue to be more and more floods.
You're always at risk.
So they made some incredible.
Let me just finish. It had nothing to do with those the guys.
I'm going to get back to that.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
Sorry.
And so, what happened was in this. There were 3 other famous floods. And after one of them, Congress finally passed several bills which dealt with floods all over the United States, but in particular, the Johnstown flood. The results of which were so fantastic, so sort of the science and the engineering was thought to be top-notch, that people said, we have now seen the last Johnstown flood. And that was in 1936. Well, in 1977, there was another flood.
Oh, my Lord.
It causing $450 million of damage. So, because there were so many floods, I'm going to get to this quickly. Because there were so many floods in this area, it was thought that this was a natural disaster. However, because there were all these millionaires in the club, and they knew that they and only they knew that they had done some repairs to the dam in 1871, 18 years before the flood.
Yeah.
And it's now come out that those improvements, which were made so they could have a better lake to float their boats on,
Yep.
in fact, was one of the causes, because they did not allow for a drainage pipe, nor did they allow for a sufficient slope so that if the dam held, but there was so much natural rainfall that the water would go over, they were supposed to have graduated fluids, and so that the water would not cause a flood, as bad a flood. But they omitted that step as well.
They omitted the drainage.
And what was interesting is that some people guessed that this was. Some people. I don't want to be sued, so I can't say. But okay. And the next day, Henry Frick, who was a millionaire, called together some of the senior boards of the South Fork Club and said, "We're not going to talk about this at all." This is the very next day. We're not going to talk about this at all. They hired 2 lawyers. All the documents of the club. Control. Exactly. All of the minutes of the meetings of the South Fork Club. And they had actually hired 2 engineers in the 70s to guide them on their improvements. Those reports were hidden and apparently have never been found. And so this is my question. So my question is, was this man guilty, Henry Clay Frick? He was the one who ordered silence. He hired 2 of the biggest lawyers in Pennsylvania, who are also members of the South Fork Club. And there were 4 lawsuits. These 2 lawyers won all of them. And
just imagine.
But the opposing lawyers had no access to any of the private information that the club owners had.
What year was that when the trials were going on?
Over a course from 1889, they started in 4 until 1900. All of them, the club won. But without gaining access to this additional information. So now, instead of walking, I'm going to tie this into my museum story. Instead of walking on air as I leave the Frick Museum, or as I ponder this book, The Sleeve Should Be Illegal, 50 famous artists and writers and sculptors gave their favorite viewpoint of 50 different works of art in this museum. Not one of them mentioned the Johnstown flood. Not one of them. They had no idea. Now I'm wondering, what is going to happen when I finally go there? Am I going to think that this man, Henry Clay Frick, was a fraud, that he made his millions? If he had been sued, let's say at that time, he had only at that time made his first million, which was a great deal at that time.
I know, it would be a lot more today.
And Andrew Carnegie, who was a member of this, fortunately, he was in Europe at the time, and he sort of publicized a lot and raised a lot of money for it. But he never said he was a member of this club, nor did he ever mention there was any potential liability. And because of that, there is now a new law which David McCullough really doesn't get into too much, but it's called the non-negligent responsibility that people have when they're making repairs or when they are involved in, let's say, a disaster, if you will, in this case, that even a non-negligent person can be held responsible, or a club can be held responsible because they did not do due diligence and oversight. And they had the opportunity to do that. And this now have, of course, we're very, whenever there's a disaster, people now, of course, a plane crashes and they sue.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part and parcel of our world. But back then,
sure.
it wasn't. Well,
I
listen,
know.
any other, that's all I can say right now. I'm afraid I've gone over our time. But any questions for me at all? I wish there was an audience. I'd throw it out to
I know.
questions from the audience.
Oh, I know.
Well, thank you very
It's so
much for
fascinating.
joining us today and for your tidbits and your frugal fin.
I'll have more the next time.
Okay.
We'll be back. Well, thank you very much, Ray. This is really fascinating. Now, I just wanted to ask, with David
Yes.
McCullough, is he the only one who's brought up this connection, correlation?
Yes.
Is it
No.
well known? I've never heard
it's,
of this.
Oh no. He's the
sort of
first one,
expose.
but it's always been there. For
Yeah.
instance, a lot of it is the people who lived there and survived
Oh,
it.
sure. They must have.
Those rich people up
They
there,
must
they
have been
caused this, whether
suspicious,
they
of
knew it at
course.
all. They were suspicious.
Well, of course they're
But there was no
suspicious.
proof
I
because
know.
it was hidden away. Oh, one other
I
thing.
know.
When South Fork Club was chartered, and David McCullough brings this out, when the South Fork Hunting and Fishing Club was chartered, according to Pennsylvania law, the charter and the founding papers and all their legal papers were supposed to be stored in that county,
Yes.
Cumbria County.
Yeah.
They incorporated in Pittsburgh, and that's another reason why the papers couldn't be found. Because again, even though it was illegal, the founding papers and all their work was in Pittsburgh, in their behind lock and key in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Covering their tracks.
That's
Even then, they must have known that there's some danger. They must have known there's some danger there, but they probably thought it wouldn't happen long after they're gone. You know what I mean? I don't think they thought it would be happen so quickly. Well,
all right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we will be back. We'll be back
next week.
Next week.
Wayne, hopefully,
God
will
willing,
be back.
as my mother always said.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Alo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Alo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien